Dear ladies and gentlemen, good morning and welcome to this first Q&A session that Lux Innovation is organizing in the frame of the Joint Defense Call on dual-use technologies in space and materials. As you know, this call for proposals was launched a few weeks ago by the Ministers of Economy, Minister of Research and Ministers of Defense. And we are now very happy to explore this first session with you. I hope you have all had the opportunity to check out the call text on the Research Industry Collaboration Platform. As recall, the Joint Defense Call, which is meant to be repeated every year, has been structured in two phases. So the first phase will be on the project idea with a deadline at the end of July, and then we will go on with the second phase for the full project proposal between September and October. Now, in order to ensure that you are fully aware of the evaluation criteria for the first phase, we have decided to set up 3 Q&A sessions. And together with my colleague Erik Lauer from Lux Innovation, we will present more specific criteria on the phase 1. But on top of that, my other colleagues from the FNR, Richard Nackert and Julia Silverio from the Directorate of Defense, will remain available throughout the whole session to answer any questions you might have with regards to the call text, the call process, or the criteria. So in this sense, don't hesitate to use the chat box on your right side. We'll be there the whole time, and we can also address them afterwards. Just one last point also, this webinar will be recorded and also made available on the Research Industry Collaboration Platform. So with this, I would like to give over to Erik.
Thank you very much, Alexander. Good morning to you all, and thank you for being here for this first Q&A session regarding the main eligibility criteria and eligible project costs for the Joint Defense Call. So my name is Erik Lauer, and I'm part of the Corporate R&D and Innovation Support Department here at Lux Innovation. So while this presentation is more focused on the companies, it is an open session, also accessible for public research organizations, as Alexandra has already mentioned, and you are more than welcome to pose your questions, since we also have Richard in this session who will be able to answer these. As for the questions, please put these within the question tab, and we will go over these to the extent possible after the presentation. The presentation is relatively short, so we will have enough time to cover all your questions, so please do not hesitate. So just for the Joint Defense Call, as a small reminder, the involved parties, so the Directorate of Defense from the Ministry of Foreign and European Affairs, the Ministry of the Economy, the FNR, and Lux Innovation. So now we move on to the main topic of today's sessions, and that is the eligibility/admission criteria for companies. So on this slide, we see the main criteria for the companies within this Joint Defense Call. Within the dotted box, those are the criteria which stem from the RDI law, which is the funding instrument for the companies within this call and is based on the law of the 17th of May 2017. So some of you might already be familiar with these if you have had RDI application on a national level. In addition to this, within this call, there are also 2 criteria specific for the call. So that is that the solutions should be dual use and that the project should be aligned with the national priorities as outlined by the call topic. To just quickly go over the main criteria, which we will go into more detail afterwards. So we have firstly the co-funding capacity of the company, the economic impact of the project, the innovative nature of the project, meaning it should be a new or improved product, process, or service, which offers the company a competitive advantage on the market and for which the company needs to overcome technological challenges to deliver the innovation. Then we will also cover the 3 generic criteria as listed here: the incentive effect, the undertaking in difficulty, and the SME analysis. So then let's start with the co-funding capacity. So for companies, it is important to demonstrate that they are able to co-fund their project. This needs to be assessed in relation to the project costs and needs to be carefully documented. Hence, it is important that a realistic budget is estimated and that the company will be able to co-fund its part of the project and deliver the expected results. The co-funding can stem either from, for instance, equity or a capital increase, free cash flow, or loans. This will depend on the company's situation and the financing need for the project. A special session is dedicated for this on the 12th of July, where we will go more into detail, especially for startups who need to submit a cash flow forecast if they are younger than 3 years. Then we move on to the economic impact. So the economic impact of the project is not a criteria. Here it needs to be illustrated how the results of the project will be exploited to generate an economic return. Hence, for the companies, it is important to demonstrate the implementation and exploitation of the project results, the go-to-market strategy and the subsequent business model, the competitive advantage and the growth prospects, and how the project contributes to the development of the substance for the Luxembourgish company. Substance can be defined manifold, such as the creation of employment, technical know-how, and intellectual property, among others. So then we move on to the generic criteria, where we start with the incentive effect. The incentive effect means that the aid needs to have a positive effect on the applicant company and its project. For instance, a company without the aid could give up carrying out a project or choose to carry it out differently in the absence of aid. Within the scope of this call, the project needs to await the final funding decision before the project can start. The decision will be communicated in February 2023 with an expected project start in March 2023. Only after this, the project can start and respect the incentive effect. This means that before the project has received the official funding decision and it has started, it cannot engage in contracts or legally binding agreements which would signal the start of the project or engage in project costs. Additionally, if you are a large company, you will need to document the incentive effect through counterfactual budget to further motivate the incentive effect of the aid. So then we move on to the next slide, and that is the slide of another generic criteria, namely the SME analysis. The SME analysis is used for the definition of the size of the undertaking. Here we do not only take into consideration the applicant company, but also the entities which, according to the EU regulation, need to be taken into consideration for the size of the group. Here we differentiate between linked and partner companies. Linked companies being companies that have direct or indirect control of the majority of voting rights of another company and the ability to exercise a dominant influence on that company. An example of this would, for instance, be Company A holds 80% of the voting rights in Company B, hence these need to be considered linked. Partner entities or partner companies are companies that have the capital or voting rights equal or greater than 25% and is not considered to be a linked entity. An example of this would, for instance, be Company A holding 37% of Company B, hence this making those two entities partner entities. This is important because for the linked entities, we need to take into consideration 100% of the staff headcount, so the full-time employees, the turnover, and the balance sheet. For the partner companies, we take into consideration a pro rata. So for instance, as in the example before, with 37% participation or voting rights, we would need to take into consideration 37% of the partner entities' staff headcount, turnover, or balance sheet. Then here in the table, we see the different thresholds. A SME, for instance, so a small to medium enterprise, is a company employing less than 250 full-time employees and has an annual turnover below 50 million or a balance sheet of less than 43 million. In order to document this, the company will need to submit a detailed organizational chart. So on this slide, we have an example of such a chart. It is important that the chart is complete and reflects all the partner and link companies, direct or indirect, as well as the UBOs, so the ultimate beneficial owners. You will also on this slide here find the SME self-assessment questionnaire, which is a questionnaire from the EU to determine the size of the company, which can also help in determining the size of your group. Nevertheless, a full legal organization chart will need to be submitted with your project outline. So then we move on to the final generic criteria, and that is the undertaking in difficulty. Those are ineligible companies, and this is a financial ratio which is checked at the applicant level, but also at the undertaking level. So an undertaking is considered to be in difficulty if it has lost more than half of its share capital, including share premiums through losses and accumulated losses. However, this criteria does not apply to SMEs which are younger than 3 years. Additionally, for large companies, it also needs to be checked that within the last 2 years, the book debt to equity ratio is smaller than 7.5, and that the EBITDA to interest coverage ratio is greater than 1. Additionally, a company cannot be in the process of restructuring or subject to collective insolvency proceeding or an outstanding recovery order of a state aid. As mentioned before, this criteria needs to be assessed both on the applicant level and the undertaking level for the last financial year. Hence, the company needs to submit the annual accounts of the applicant company and the consolidated accounts of the group if it belongs to a group. However, if the company or the group does not have consolidated accounts, this can also be done through a simplified aggregation where, if necessary, Lux Innovation can provide a template. Another important aspect here is that when we talk about undertaking here is not the same as before, where we look at the SME analysis to determine the size. Here, when we talk about undertaking, we take into consideration all the entities which can be considered linked. So on this slide, we have an example of an undertaking in difficulty. So we see a company which has a share capital of 12,000, no share premium, and which has reported losses for this year of almost 156,000, making the company in severe difficulty. This is rather an extreme case, and the company can also just slightly be in difficulty. And another scenario would, for instance, be if the applicant company is not in difficulty, but the group is in difficulty, then still the applicant company and the group would not be eligible. So now we move on to the eligible project costs for the companies. So first of all, we have the staff costs, which are involved in the project, where we take into consideration the gross salaries plus 20% for the social charges during the time they work on the project, the investments / equipments which are used during the project. Here we take into consideration the depreciation over the project duration, the materials and consumables which are used during the project, then the subcontracting necessary for the project, and there are also the overhead, which is 25% of the staff costs which are eligible. This is then multiplied by an aid rate ranging from 25 to a maximum of 80% state aid, depending on the type of the research, the size of the company, and if the project is collaborative. A few examples of ineligible costs within the project would, for instance, be operational and marketing expenses, administrative and managerial activities, leave time and transport costs, which are already accounted for in the overheads. So this is the first Q&A session we will hold for before the end of phase 1, which will take place on the 29th of July. So the next Q&A session will focus on the co-funding capacity and will also be for the startups, where we will provide more details regarding the cash flow which is necessary. Shortly before the submissions on the 26th of July, there will be a final Q&A session to check the completeness of the application. Additionally to these upcoming Q&A sessions, we have a regular FAQ, which is updated on the platform, where you can find all relevant questions. Just as a reminder for the platform and the functionality it offers. So first of all, you can browse the existing project ideas. If you are looking for a partner and you have not yet found a partner, you can find your project partner on the platform. And finally, it is also on the platform where you create your application for the phase 1 and provide the needed information as well as the necessary documentation. So if you have not done so yet, please visit the platform and explore the functionality as well as the needed documents for a phase 1 application. So with this, I want to thank you for the attention for this presentation, and then I would suggest that we move on to the question and answers.
Well, thank you, Eric, for this presentation. I think yes, the floor is open now for all participants to ask their questions. So we have in the room Julia Silverio from Director of Defense, Richard Nackert from FNR. So any questions related to the call text, the criteria also can be asked here. We can take the first one from Stéphane Lagrange from Gradel. So yes, the presentations will be made available, respectively the video is being recorded and made available on the Research Industry Collaboration Platform. And for the template itself, it's fully online, so you just need to register on the Research Industry Platform, fill in all the information there, and that will be sufficient for the phase 1. It's only in phase 2, once we go for the full project application, that you will be required to also fill in a template. And as mentioned by Eric also, so we have this FAQ section on the Research Industry Collaboration Platform, where you can check new questions which were raised during the last weeks, and you'll find the answers directly there. So unless there's any other question, maybe from our side, is there anything else which you would like to communicate, maybe on Directorate of Defense side or on FNR side?
I could perhaps just make a general statement concerning perhaps the eligibility of costs or the cost structure for the public research institutions, that if there are questions, I just want to state that our financial guidelines, which you can find on the web, or I can just post the link in a minute in the chat. There you can find all the eligible cost and the cost structure for the defense call. For the ones that are already familiar with the health tech call that was carried out last year, these are the same So the rules and the financial guidelines for the defense call are the same as for the health tech call, or they are very, very similar to the bridges call for the ones that are more familiar with this call. Yeah, perhaps this helps as a general statement.
Okay, then we have some questions which are coming up. So first question of Pierre Rasmussen. So will only one or multiple companies be selected? Yes, so there's in theory no limits. So we really look at all the project ideas that will be submitted. It is in fact true that if we see that there's a big number of companies, that there might be the need to pre-select some of this. But yes, it's possible to either submit alone, so individual projects are possible, and as well collaborative ones. So this could be between companies, two companies, but also just between two research organizations, or really a complete mix between companies and research organizations. This is really completely up to you on how you want to structure your project. Yes, then the second question's about the registrations. So do we need a user account for each person that needs to connect to the platform? So yes, I think one applicant is enough, but nevertheless, so it's important that each of you registrates so that you can have access to the platform. So one applicant is enough, but if you want to get access also to see which projects are actually being proposed, it could also be project ideas or project ideas that you want to share, you need to register, and then you get full access to all the information. Okay, so unless there's no other questions, I would propose to close this session. Of course, you have, you know where you can reach us, and if not, we have also the general question possibility contact form on the Research Industry Collaboration platform. So don't hesitate to reach out to us, and then we will, of course, have the next Q&A session within 2 weeks, and then we can address it at this moment in time at latest. So thank you very much for having been with us. Thank you also to all the speakers, and see you soon again.